Right away, don't let anyone tell you not to enjoy Starfield. I'm also not here to change your opinion on the game. I just wanted to talk about the game and my first impression of it. But I'm also a gameplay first kind of player, and I see a little bit of an issue in how open world games like this are made. I'm a bit worried that more games in the future will be just bigger and look more realistic, with a ton of areas without actually filling those areas with content. I'm not talking about some random throwaway enemies. I'm talking about some actual content that fits the game or pushes the boundaries of the genre. Before we jump into the actual video, let me bring up this arbitrary triangle I made. Where are you on this triangle? You got story at the top, gameplay is bottom left, and visuals is bottom right. I'm personally a bottom left. I love gameplay over everything else. This probably comes from games I played in my childhood. Age of Empires, The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap, Metroid Fusion, racing games overall, all are gameplay first. But it was also more time consuming to make proper stories back then, especially with a limited number of megabytes on a disc or cartridge. Obviously, Blu-rays are still sold, but let's be honest, this isn't a hard limit anymore. Back to the triangle, you probably know where you are on this triangle, which in my opinion are the main pillars in designing a video game, and as you may realize, you can't have it all. Starfield has one of those three pillars, for the most part at least, and that is visuals. So I'm not talking about performance here, which I had no issues with, but I'm talking about the texture resolution, consistency between textures across the entire game, effects and lighting. I sometimes stopped running from area to area or NPC to NPC and just looked. I stood there appreciating the hundreds of artists that made these textures and visuals for probably thousands of hours. Again, the game is beautiful. There's a lot to see in this game, and especially at the start, you have this honeymoon phase with a new game. Especially me, because I'm a bit of a graphic whore, so Starfield fills that hole. But graphics or visuals can only get you so far, at least for me. Next up is story, which right away I tend to ignore or even skip for the most part nowadays, because most stories in games are very generic or at least not that important. Starfield is a sci-fi adventure, so it clearly wants to have a bunch of stories, quests, factions, characters you interact and bond with. So why on earth, or New Atlantis, is the story the same boring, you are the chosen one kind of story? This has been told probably thousands of times. We don't need this, right? There is no way a few writers who get together can't write something better than this story. The beginning is so important, and if you screw that up, you instantly lose me. Cyberpunk is a great example. The start was quite good, but the moment it skipped months of progress in some weird cutscene, the game died to me. I didn't care for the story, the characters, or even my own character. Like, who am I? Does it matter if the game literally skips the most important part of the main character becoming someone in this new city? Back to Starfield, it doesn't do that, but what it does is have cookie-cutter, generic replies in conversations on top of the same system that has plagued Bethesda games for so long. I think. To be honest, it has been years since I played a Bethesda game, but it feels like this has been the same since Skyrim, which is, by the way, 12 years old now. Sorry to make you feel old, but it did come out on the 11th of November in 2011. Is it just me, or does the year 2011 sound ancient by now? Sorry, back to the video. What do you do in real life when you want to talk to someone? Do you A, go over to their house or meet up at a bar they usually visit, or B, fucking call them or message them through the 10 messaging apps we all have on our phone now? If you answered B, congrats, you are not an NPC. So why on earth are we still walking from NPC to NPC instead of calling them? The technology is clearly there to have two characters converse with each other without being face to face. Maybe this is just very boring to some, but that's how I am. A gameplay first player. I could explain what this means, but actually just check out the video of NakeyJakey of him explaining what a goopy goblin gamer brain is. I think that's what it was called. It explains it perfectly. So it's like moment to moment action. If I have 1 minute of non-action, I'm already like, a little bit annoyed, and if it's like 5 minutes of non-action, the game is actively losing me. Running over the surface of Mars isn't action. Sorry, back to the story. Now, I still want the game to offer you a role-playing aspect by persuading or lying to some characters. That should be in the game if Bethesda and the game designers like that. But I'm someone who will always do whatever the other person says, and I just move on. Obviously, having conversations during your quest or during other walking sections in the gameplay would help this tremendously. You don't have to go to that NPC anymore, saving 2 loading times, and thus you are more in the world and playing more instead of waiting or spamming through conversations. I'm not saying in this example there shouldn't be an option to converse, but what if I just wanted the info on where to go next? Then tell me and stop talking. Okay, but on the positive side though, something I always wanted more in games finally happened in Starfield. I talked to NPC A, and NPC B, which was the father, reacted to how I answered the questions of NPC A. I know it's incredibly complex and time-consuming, but this is how immersion should be. If I answered in an open, quiet room, yeah, I will kill that guy for 5,000 credits, a lot of people, like the basic NPCs, should not only react but remember me. Major characters in the world should know this from now on, and this may potentially change questlines and dialogue. I know this is a dream that gamers had probably 30 years ago, but I think it's only a dream because open world games are constantly being made bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't know why we aren't stopping at Skyrim levels and start to fill it to the brim with characters, interactions, quest lines that converge with each other, and more. And lastly, maybe fill that area with content that I can interact with, which for me is gameplay. The first issue in Hour 1 and 2 was oxygen. I hate it. If you walk or run, your oxygen levels go down and your CO2 levels go up. This is a lot more extreme when you're overweight, and we will get to the weight problem in a bit, but this is just annoying. Hi, Daniel here, many days, or has it been weeks, since recording my original first impression of Starfield. There were some updates, it seems, because I have just started it, played it a bit, and realized you cannot run when you have max CO2 anymore. So apparently they kind of nerfed that strategy, so now you're literally forced to stop moving, which is kind of worse than it was before. Not that it was a good idea to move, lose health, and then not care about it, but they really couldn't think of something else. Anyhow, the good thing though, maybe I just missed it the first 8 hours, or maybe this was also patched, was that you now actually get oxygen back when you're in a conversation. So that's great. Alright, back to my original first impression. I teased it earlier, so let's talk about weight and loot because it's closely connected. You could probably talk about this topic for over an hour, but I won't, because I've only played 8 hours, and I'm guessing there is more to loot as you explore more dangerous areas and fight more dangerous enemies. But what I have played a lot is a small indie game. Okay, jokes aside, it's Path of Exile. In a game like Path of Exile, you have inventory space and clearly way too much loot on the ground. PoE is also an action RPG, so we can't compare Starfield to it one-to-one. Still, both games have items that come from enemies or NPCs. PoE is a lot more specific by having modifiers or stats, you can call them. Not every stat is important or even helpful for your build, and the game, or third-party tools, can filter out loot that isn't necessary, thus reducing the stress on your inventory space. In Starfield, there is no option to filter out stuff. There is also no option to show stuff that is valuable. You must look at each thing and see if it has high value. I hate this. This feels more like they added all this stuff to make the world real, which I appreciate, but also to waste your time playing the game. This really turned me off from looking around and finding cool stuff, because I knew 99% is going to be worthless compared to the loot from enemies, which sells for more. I wish there would be something in the game, even something I could craft and improve over the course of the game, that filters out loot visually or highlights things that are more valuable. Here are some minor things I want to mention that jumped out at me during my playtime. The first thing was selling items was annoying and vendors don't have enough credit. It was a pain getting rid of my loot, which should never be the case. I had to travel to 3 different planets to get rid of all my loot at the start of the game. Seems like a massive pain that could be easily avoided by just adding a 0 to every vendor. Or just a better system. Like how on earth does a massive corporation only have 5,000 credits at their vendor? Second, I was able to fast travel to the lodge while being encumbered, but I then wanted to go back to the ship, because I forgot to sell my loot first, but couldn't. That just seems like it's unfinished or a bit unbalanced, where a player can and can't fast travel sometimes. And third, digipicks are like a fancy new minigame on how to unlock doors in the game, break into doors you shouldn't and get some fat loot. I personally like it a bit, but it does get annoying if you make a mistake. You can undo mistakes, but it uses a digipick each time, which seems like a massive waste, because I never found enough digipicks in my 8 hours. I wish I didn't have to spend another digipick to go back. It just seems a little bit annoying. I think Bethesda's game design hasn't changed a lot in many years. I think they need to start experimenting with open world games and push the storytelling and especially the gameplay of the genre. Just like how Grinding Gear Games adds experimental new content every 3 months to Path of Exile for the past decade in form of temporary seasons, pushing the limits of the ARPG genre by adding tower defense, an auto battler, or even a roguelike mode, Bethesda needs to start experimenting. They need the data now so they can improve upon those ideas for future games, which then take another 2 to 3 years to finish. Bethesda has been riding the wave of Fallout 3 since its release. They clearly know what they're doing with their formula. In Starfield, I was immersed, I was enjoying myself, and I wanted more. More improvements, more systems, and just more gameplay. But Starfield lacks in obvious quality of life improvements, like easily selling items, which the game revolves around because you need the credit to upgrade your ship, or a system similar to ARPGs with crafting and making the weapon the way you want it to be. And lastly, new types of gameplay, like a racing mode on different planets, a type of tournament which earns you rewards if you win and the longer you stay at the top, or modes in which you have to protect an NPC while he or she gathers the resources that you want while monsters attack. Starfield feels new and old at the same time after a 5-year-long development. It has gorgeous visuals, characters that are beautifully voice acted, and gameplay that sometimes feels so fun, like when gravity turns off while you're inside a ship and you start floating through the air in the middle of combat. It's magical, but then you look closer. Between the great voice acting, you still have those awkward pauses, and then the gameplay that, as mentioned, doesn't offer basic things like a communication system between you and the characters you met before. This and much more makes it feel old, and it shows that it's still clinging onto the old formula that worked back with Fallout 3. It doesn't work for me, but if it works for you and you enjoy Starfield, I'm happy for you. We all want to play games that we enjoy. I didn't enjoy Starfield for long, and my enjoyment turned sour over my 8 hours. I hope for big improvements in forms of updates, but I doubt they will come, which I understand. And a message to Bethesda from someone who's 30 and, knows nothing about game development, so probably not worth much. I really hope they change their formula and start experimenting. There are game developers, designers, artists, voice actors, and probably much more than I even know. I'm sure they do interesting, wacky stuff outside of their 8-hour job. Bethesda should use that energy and that passion behind those people. They're probably in this part of work because they love what they do and are probably fucking good at it. Use this to your advantage, Bethesda. Please. Thanks for watching.